Michael Gakuran tries to live by the motto, adventure first. Born in Britain, he spent half his life involved with Japan and currently resides in Tokyo doing a mix of sales, marketing, and consultation to fund his true passion, which is exploration. Traveling around Japan and occasionally overseas, he's deeply interested in Haikyo, or ruins, urban exploration, and all manner of secret, obscure, and unknown things. You can read about his adventures and browse his photography on gakuran.com. That's Gakuran.com. Glad you're here, Michael.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for the introduction. This is my first time giving a talk on this subject, which I've been involved in for quite a long time now, so forgive me if there's any blips in there. But I do hope you enjoy it and that you're not too drunk to appreciate it. Okay. So this would be my view if it wasn't for the fact it's pitch black. I'm sitting in the loft of an abandoned veterinary school in Brussels, Belgium. And outside, I can hear the sound of cars pulling up, and dogs barking, and radios. Police radios, because about 30 minutes prior to this, I'd been in the basement of this very building, about to take some photos of a very particular room, when, lo and behold, through one of the windows leading to the ground level, the caretaker had spotted my flashlight, a complete rookie mistake. And he had started spouting a barrage of French at me through this window and trying to hit me with his flashlight. And I just stood in complete silence. The one word I did recognize from the French he was speaking at me, completely forgotten all my GCSE French, was sortir, which I took to mean get the hell out of my building right now. But I had other ideas. I didn't come all the way to Belgium to leave empty-handed, right? So I scurried back up to the attic and hid in this crawl space where I now sit. To give you a better idea of it, this is the building. This photo I took just before the sunset. As you can see, the sun's going down, and I am up here. So I sit in this crawl space for about an hour to 3 hours. The police come, I hear the noise, but they never seem to make it up to the attic, or if they do, they never find me in my crawl space. But eventually, I think, well, I can't sit here forever, because there's another part of this story that I need to mention. About 4 kilometers north of this building, in a hotel room, is my fiancée of 24 hours. The day before, we'd been in Bruges, and I proposed it, the whole thing getting down on one knee and stuff, and she had thankfully said yes. But now, little bonus to me, she was sitting in the hotel room, fretting, crying, contacting my family and friends in the UK, and on the verge of contacting the British Embassy in Belgium to file a missing person report. Me and my wisdom and planning had no cell reception, no smartphone at that time, so no way of contacting her to let her know it was okay. But I'm sitting here, and I haven't got my photos, and I need to get back, so I decide very, very slowly to start walking through the building, from the attic down to the basement again. It takes me about an hour to do this, because I'm paranoid that around every corner there's a policeman and his dog waiting to grab me by the scruff of the neck and pull me off to Belgium prison for New Year's. This was about the 30th of December. I eventually make it to the basement, to the room that I meant to photograph the whole time. And this is it. Yes, a veterinary school. And I have to warn you now, there are some rather horrific images coming up. So I'm sure the staff at the Good Heavens Bar would be very appreciative. If you had fish and chips and you don't have a very strong stomach, you might want to close your eyes for this part of the presentation. I'll let you know when it's done. We all okay? So this is the Horror Labs, as it's known by its nickname, for obvious reasons. A veterinary school, so the students would have studied about animals and animal biology and anatomy. And there were all sorts of these animal parts, heads, carcasses, bits of meat, sitting in this basement for years after it's been abandoned, and became a very, very famous location among urban explorers. So this was the very unique location that I came to explore, and I wouldn't leave without getting these photos. All sorts of horrific, very, very scary things, but very unique and very, very cool for me. You'll be glad to know I did make it out of the building without getting caught and back to my wife before she contacted the British Embassy. She's my wife now, by the way. She was my fiancée at the time. So that was a good ending to this adventure. But I'm sure you're wondering, why on earth would you be doing something like this? And why would you want to photograph these macabre heads in a basement of an abandoned veterinary school? Well, I'd like to bring up George Mallory. He's a mountain climber, was a mountain climber who wanted to be the first man who conquered Everest. And he was asked, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? And he gave the answer, because it's there. Because it's there. No, but really, really why? This is actually another quote from George Mallory. What we get from this adventure is just sheer joy. This is an illustration by Zen pencils I borrowed off the internet. What we get from this adventure is sheer joy. The joy of, for me, we'll get there eventually, discovery. And this video pretty much sums up the feeling. We all know this movie. Very famous movie, The Goonies. Yes, The Goonies. This is basically the entire core of urban exploration for me. This feeling, this overwhelming feeling of discovery. When you stumble across something, or when you put in a shitload of time and effort to find something and then you finally find it. This overwhelming feeling. A little bit about me. So my explorer roots, if you will. I'm an 80s kid. Raised on LucasArts adventure games, Monkey Island particularly. Yes, I'm a mighty pirate. Yes, insult sword fighting was one of my strongest suits in my youth. I then went on to discover Japan as a teenager and graduated in philosophy and Japanese, not Japanese philosophy, from the University of Leeds in the UK, and came to Japan on the JET program originally. Around that time, I started exploring ruins, or Haikyo as they're known, under the alias Gakuran Man. A Gakuran is a Japanese schoolboy jacket, and the man is hopefully me. Gakuran Man, so it was a little experiment in online branding at the time, and I've stuck with it ever since. So that's me. But then what is urban exploration? I'm sure you've got a pretty good idea now from what I've shared with you, but basically it's exploring man-made sites, usually abandoned or off limits. And you can kind of think of this in two varieties, if you will. Infiltration, which is the literally infiltrating of live sites which are still manned or under heavy security, or exploration, or more accurately ruins exploration, which is sites that are falling into dilapidation and generally don't have anybody looking after them. And there's this whole treasure hunting mentality. The fun is there in the discovery of things, taking photos. You have many different communities as well in the urbex community. So stalkers, for example, are the nickname of the group of people in Ukraine who explore Pripyat and Chernobyl. The cataphiles are people who explore the hundreds of kilometers of tunnels under the cities of Paris, which are stacked full of bones. The cave clan in Australia, who like to go down drains. And in Japan, you've got what are called Haikyo mania, basically people who like exploring ruins. And the motto of urban explorers is to take only pictures and leave only footprints. So to leave no trace that you were there so that future explorers can enjoy what you did. So where can you go? You've got asylums. Particularly in America and Europe, you'll have these amazing architectures and huge buildings which can take sometimes days to explore. You've got theme parks, this one being in Fukushima, it's still there. You've got factories, hospitals. Particularly in Japan, you have wooden hospitals from the Taisho and Showa periods of Japanese history. Military facilities, this one's just outside of Tokyo. Drains. Schools, again in Japan, another big one. Houses and infrastructure like train lines and tunnels. So these are your kind of a different Haikyo that you can visit. There are more, of course, but this is a rough selection. So let's have a quick intermission. Does anybody know what this island is called? Yes, but that's not the question. This is Yonkojima, Battleship Island, or Hashima is its official name. It had a school and a Shinto shrine, a hospital, and a jail. But there was one thing that most communities have that it lacked. What was that thing? Not a restaurant. You have to be louder. Not a kombini. Not a cento. No, there was a cento. They had a way of getting mail off the island. It's a good idea, though. They had toilets, thankfully. They had ways of putting out fires on the island. They had water, yes. They did survive. Hotel? No, it's a very, very fundamental thing that all... I'm sure there was much love made on the... No. It's a very, very fundamental thing. It's related to all... I don't want to give the key word away. All human life. There we go. Who's that? There we go. Cemetery, yes. Cemetery or a crematorium was actually on the nearby island of Nakanoshima, which is about a stone's throw away. The kids would actually swim across to these two islands because there just wasn't enough space on the island for this. And as many of you probably know, Gunkanjima was a coal mining facility. So the miners would go down deep into the shafts every day to mine coal, and there were deaths and losses. So this is where they cremated them. Okay, so back to urban exploration. I've broken it down to kind of 6 different sort of ways of enjoying it, if you will. First one is exploration. So for me, this is the biggest part. This is me on Gunkanjima. Just the thrill, if you will, of going somewhere that you don't know, every nook and cranny, every turn, what's there, what you're going to find, this whole explorer mentality. Then you've got maybe the artist, another one of mine, another big passion of mine is photography, so going to these places and coming back with some beautiful pictures. This is actually a power plant in just outside of Morioka in Tohoku. I went with a friend when the tide, the river was low, so we could cross over to this facility and actually get inside. You have the Daredevil. I don't do a lot of this, but sometimes things like this. I'm sure you've all seen the pictures of the Russian roof-toppers and people who go on skyscrapers with a GoPro and take pictures of themselves. This is another big part of urban exploration, and this definitely falls into the infiltration part. The historian. So students of archaeology and history, or more generally, looking at the history of places and finding out who was there, why were there, what were they doing. This is actually a picture from a rather luxurious house in Hakone, which was a kind of aristocrat family who had connections to a British philanthropist who was a millionaire. So this was a very, very interesting Haikyo to research and find out and what led to its abandonment. The Ghost Hunter. I don't do a lot of this, but there are a lot of kids who enjoy doing tests of courage and things. But this was the closest thing I could find to ghosts in a Haikyo. This was a picture of a doll that I took at an abandoned clinic. It was actually decapitated, so I put it back together. And made a nice picture from it. I've never seen any ghosts, by the way. I'm sure that's going to be a question. And finally, the tourist. We're all tourists when we start something new, and I was a tourist in this particular photo. This is me visiting the Paris Catacombs with my 3 French guides. Couldn't have done it without their help because there are hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, and if your light goes out or you take a wrong turn, you can die, as one very famous cataphile did. Actually, another one in more recent years. So we all tourist when we start, and that's definitely not a bad thing. Okay, quiz number 2. People who are good with their... well, maybe I've given it away. Sorry, yes. Go back. Okay, we'll see if anybody... Okay, how many vacant houses are there as of the latest government study in 2013? I hope nobody saw it. 15? Yeah, more than that. 75,000? No, a bit higher. No, more. No. You're still 1 digit out. Higher. I think that we'll give it to you. That's pretty close. I mean, we got there by trial and error, but they're actually there we go. 8.2 million vacant houses in 2013. 13.5% of houses. Now, I've got to explain this a little bit. First of all, so 13.5% in 2013. According to a Nomura research report, this will rise to 21% by 2023 and 32% by 2035 if the government doesn't do anything. The government, of course, set goals to stop this and reduce the number to 4 million by 2025. But about these figures, so vacant properties doesn't just mean Haikyo and derelict buildings. Actually, this graph doesn't include derelict buildings, so it's a bit of a misnomer. About 50% are rental, 5% vacation, and 3.8% are for sale. But of these, about 40% are vacant for other reasons. And when you look at these other reasons, about 60% of those other reasons are properties that are damaged, so you can't live in them without restoring them. And obviously, properties that are damaged are less likely to be repaired, so they all fall into ruin and become derelict buildings. So this is all connected to why there are so many Haikyo in Japan. Also, about 68% of the vacant homes are pre-1980, so they're not fully earthquake-proof, so people are not willing to buy them generally or use them. So why do Haikyo exist? This is one of the most common questions I get on my posts on my website and when I talk in person. Sorry for the small text here. So a big reason is the asset price bubble. The bubble burst at the beginning of the 1990s. You had a big economic boom. There was lots of optimism. People had a lot of surplus cash. They took out loans. They bought real estate and stocks. And then they used those real estate and the land that they bought as collateral to get more loans. And eventually, this became a huge, huge bubble, which inflated asset prices. The bubble popped. Assets become liabilities. Bad debt, deflationary spiral for the next 10 years. And a lot of these people that invested and bought land and ruins then couldn't support them anymore. So bought land and property, couldn't support them anymore, and they became ruins. So this is a huge part of the ruin culture in Japan. You also have aging and depopulation. As we know, Japan has a big problem with its increasingly elderly society, so the owner may be unreachable or has already died. And in the case where they've died, they may have multiple heirs, and a property is obviously not an easy thing to break up among multiple heirs. So it can be years before they figure out how to sell it or how to divide it up, which means it remains vacant and ruined all that time. And also young people moving to the city and communities, local rural communities fading. Finally, a bit obscure for most people who haven't bought or built a home in Japan, but there are actually tax benefits and building standards which also contribute to this ruins culture in Japan. So you get reductions of fixed asset tax on residential land with property. Basically, if you have a piece of land, it's better to have a structure on it, even if it's about to fall down. And renovating is not very popular in Japan. It's very interesting, but only about 10% of the pre-owned housing market in Japan, of the housing market is pre-owned, whereas it's about 60 to 90% in the West. So pre-owned houses are just not very popular. And vacant homes with no access to a street or one that's over 4 meters wide cannot have a property on them. So if you, for example, demolish a building on a piece of land with the intention of making a new house, unless it has access to a street, you can't do that without building a street, and obviously that's not going to be cheap. So this is a kind of the reasons why there are so many Haikyo in Japan. The government is trying to do things about this, so I'll very briefly go through that, just so they're not sitting on their asses. They are doing stuff. About May 2015, the Land Ministry has amended the law, which basically allows local government municipalities to track down owners of land who have abandoned properties or properties that are falling into disrepair, and basically force them to demolish it and also foot some of the costs. And you've also got amended tax law, so that law I told you about having a property on a piece of land, they will basically take that right away from you if you don't maintain the property, so that benefit basically disappears. And also local communities are also trying to refurbish vacant homes into community centers, lending to students who don't have a lot of money, things like that. So there are efforts to rectify this problem, which is obviously, as for an explorer like me, is not really very cool because I like exploring these buildings. But I think we'll all agree that the situation is pretty dire right now. Okay, quiz 3. Unfortunately, there's no prize for this one, but you can get bonus points anyway. Oh, there can be? Okay. So what is this? There you go. Who said it? What beehive? Yes, yeah, I'll give you that. Yes, it is. Yay! It is the nest of a Asian hornet. Yeah, well, these things are lethal, which basically brings me to one of my final slides. Just going over some of the dangers in Haikyo. There we go. Animals, bees, spiders, snakes, dogs, and bears. You could meet all of these things in ruins. The bees, in particular, kill several people in Japan because they have a very strong venom, and some people are allergic to it. So you get stung by one of these. If you have the wrong kind of DNA, you may end up dead. It's not a joke. Spiders, particularly in Australia. Snakes are venomous ones in Okinawa. Dogs, I've never really seen it. And bears, these are usually in Hokkaido. and certain parts of Honto as well. Again, I've never, fortunately, come across a bear, but if you're in bear country, it's something to be very careful of. People. This is much more of a problem overseas than in Japan. In fact, I've never come across any homeless people in Japan, any drug addicts, any criminals, and dead bodies. These are all things that you could find in Haikyo, but overseas, yes, you do get homeless and drug addicts and criminals, and people having guns. It can be very, very dangerous. Substances, asbestos being the main one. This is a lot of old buildings in the walls, the flooring, the pipe lagging, everything. Pigeon lung, basically pigeon feces, is very bad for you. Mold, spores, toxic substances like medicines left lying around, and methane accumulating in basements. These are all dangers that you might want to avoid. And finally, the environment. So you'll fall through floors, there's broken glass, nails, and closing doors is one to be aware of. For example, if you're on the 5th floor of a hotel and the door closes behind you and doesn't have a door handle, you might be shit out of luck. So it's something to remember. But I talk about all this not to inspire you to go to Haikyo per se, but to go out and explore and discover your local environment. And this could be as simple as going a different route to work, taking one of the back roads. You'll find all sorts of wonderful cafes and buildings with strange architecture, maybe a little shrine or something like that. So this aspect of discovery is what I want you to take home today. And I'll leave you with a quote from one of my favorite poets, Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you very much for listening.